Almost every single viable deck in Clash Royale has at least one building in it, and that's for good reason. Buildings are an essential part of defending, especially since they can distract most win conditions like the Hog Rider and Electro Giant so that they don't go straight for your crown tower. Problem is, players seem to just plop them down in the middle of the map hoping they magically solve all their problems, but every building in the game is actually unique and requires specific placements to get the most value and win you games. Today we're going through every building in Clash Royale, how to actually use them properly, avoid the rookie mistakes, and squeeze out every last bit of value from each and every one. Before we jump into the first building, here are a couple of general tips that'll be useful for almost any building you choose. For any building in the game aside from the Elixir Collector, of course, you'll generally want to place it in the center of your side of the arena so that it pulls tower targeting troops as far as possible, buying you time to save Elixir and your tower more time to chip away at the unit's health. If done properly, a lot of times you can get both of your crown towers to attack a troop at once, even when your king tower is not activated, and this is ideal. You'll also want to avoid placing your building too close to the river in most cases, as this will allow ranged units like the Musketeer and Flying Machine to safely take out the building before it can get any value. Second, all buildings have a health bar that gradually decays over time, even without the building taking any damage from enemy troops or spells, so try not to place defensive buildings down when they are not needed or if you don't anticipate an immediate threat, otherwise your opponent can just sit there and generate elixir while your building slowly dies and gets no value. And the final general tip, which most of you probably already know, is that buildings cannot be cloned or healed since they aren't troops, so don't bother trying. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first building. Tombstone is the cheapest and most disposable building in the game, and that's exactly why it's so useful. Think about how much value the 1 elixir skeletons give you on defense, and the Tombstone is the same concept, but just in the form of a building that can pull tower targeting units like the Hog Rider so that they don't end up on your tower. The Tombstone is insanely effective at fully countering slow hitting single target units like the P.E.K.K.A, Mini P.E.K.K.A, Boss Bandit, Prince, and Giant Skeleton. Since those units hit so slowly and can't deal splash damage, they'll get really distracted on the way to the Tombstone by the skeletons that spawn, leaving your tower with plenty of time to chip away at their health. Then if they actually even make it to the Tombstone itself and take it out, 4 more skeletons come out and can ideally hold the enemy unit in the middle of the arena where both towers can finish them off along with the skeletons themselves. Now every card has its weakness, and the Tombstone is no different. If your opponent sends a log towards your Tombstone when it's under about half health, this will destroy the Tombstone and the spawned skeletons, often leaving their prince headed straight to your tower with nothing stopping it. As such, it's a good idea to bait out your opponent's log or zap before using the Tombstone if you want the best chance of getting a ton of value out of it. A good way to use the Tombstone can be to distract splash cards like the Executioner from targeting your graveyard skeletons. Since the Tombstone provides a constant stream of skeletons, it can be just enough to distract splash units long enough for your graveyard to do some serious damage. The cannon is perhaps the purest and most simple defensive building in the game. Cheap, fast, and efficient. Think of the cannon as your surgical building. It's not flashy, but it gives you positive elixir trades all day long. Especially paired with cycle decks, cannon is a workhorse that keeps your defense rock solid for just 3 elixir, which is primarily why its main use is in 2.6 hog decks. The cannon's biggest downside is obviously not being able to hit air units. However, it can still be used to pull air cards like the balloon into the middle of the arena, allowing one or both crown towers a lot of time to damage or even destroy it. When using the cannon to counter a balloon push though, you would ideally want to pair it with something like the archers to help deal damage and take out the balloon and any support units, since the tower might not be enough, especially when the balloon is supported with a lumberjack or something similar. Since the cannon is so cheap, there are a lot of cards that it can fully counter for an easy positive elixir trade, giving you the upper hand over your opponent. The best examples would be the Barbarians, Dark Prince, Skeleton Army, Goblin Gang, and Hog Rider, which are all even or +1 trades. Taking this one step further, against high HP troops, the cannon can be paired with high damage units like the Mini P.E.K.K.A, Lumberjack, Hunter, or Inferno Dragon for a much more robust defense. One thing to watch out for with the cannon is that there are a few ground units that can outrange it, like the Magic Archer, Dark Goblin, Princess, and Evolved Archers. When facing these troops, it would be wise to wait and place the cannon only once the enemy units are already in range so that the cannon can actually get value and you don't put yourself at an elixir deficit. In matchups where your opponent has air units like the minions or bats, it would be wise to play the cannon a bit further back from the bridge than usual to prevent those air units from taking it out completely without being in range of your crown towers. The Goblin Hut has gone through a lot of balance changes and rework since its release very early on in the game's history. Because of this, I'll give you a quick breakdown of how the card currently works, at least as of this video's release, so that you understand how to use it. The Goblin Hut used to be a hybrid building that could be used both offensively and defensively, since it would spawn waves of multiple speared goblins which could then cross the bridge and chip away at your opponent's towers. Now, however, the Goblin Hut will only spawn goblins when enemy units are within its 6-tile range, and it actually spawns them fairly quickly, with one spawning every 1.9 seconds. Then when the Goblin Hut is destroyed, one more spear goblin will also spawn, similarly to how 4 skeletons spawn upon death for the Tombstone. A great way to use the Goblin Hut when defending is to wait until the opponent's push is in range of the hut, and then place a tanky card like a giant on top of it to keep their push distracted while goblins accumulate and deal tons of damage. Then with a lot of goblins accumulated, your opponent will also be forced to use a log or arrows to deal with those goblins as they cross the bridge so that they don't destroy their crown tower. Tower. This can obviously be even more devastating if a mini tank like a knight is then placed in front of the goblins to tank in the counter push. The Goblin Cage is one of the most flexible defensive buildings in the game. Right out of the gate, it's worth mentioning that not all buildings in Clash Royale have the same hitbox, even if they're the same size. For example, the Goblin Cage and Goblin Hut both have a hitbox that allows them to pull building targeting units from a slightly further distance compared to something like a cannon. The Goblin Cage is also unique in that it is always used to soak up damage, tank, and distract, where most other buildings reward you for keeping the building out of harm's way so that it can keep shooting or spawning units for as long as possible. The building itself is moderately tanky, but a lot of the value of this card comes from the Brawler that pops out when it's destroyed. To give you a better idea of the Brawler's stats, he has a bit less health than the Royal Ghost and does a bit more damage per second than a single elite Barbarian. Just like other buildings that have spawned units, the Goblin Cage or Brawler can be used defensively and then survive for a counter push that must be addressed. For this reason, the Goblin Cage is very popular in Royal Hog's recruits decks because those decks want as many extra units as possible to create overwhelming pushes that often span both lanes. So for example, in those decks, players often replace the log with the Barbarian barrel for its spawned unit, and they replace the cannon or Tesla that other decks use for a Goblin Cage that makes their defense and offense just that much better. So I'd recommend using the Goblin Cage if you want a versatile defensive building that can tank and distract just as well as it can support your pushes and pressure your opponent to defend. The Bomb Tower is a pure defensive powerhouse. If you're sick of losing to swarms, Royal Hogs, or Royal Recruits, Bomb Tower is your answer. Its massive splash radius and tankiness make it perfect for mid lane control. Since the Bomb Tower has a solid range at 6 tiles, you can often place it a bit further back from the river, even 4 tiles back in some cases, which lets it defend both lanes and cover nearly the entire bridge area. The Bomb Tower does 222 area damage per hit at tournament standard, and the Death Bomb does that same amount. The secret to the Death Bomb is that it can hit ground and air troops, just like the Balloon's Death Bomb, so you don't want to let this bomb go to waste if you choose to use this building in your deck. For example, if you're facing a Lava Hound deck and using the Bomb Tower, you don't actually want to place it in the middle and try to pull the Hound. You instead want to place it right on top of the Hound in the middle of the lane to increase the chances of their push getting hit by the Death Bomb. Overall, the Bomb Tower is actually a pretty versatile building that can work in a lot of decks, especially when combined with other splash cards and then maybe a glass cannon like the Musketeer to help take out tankier units. I'm including the cannon card in this video since a lot of the same principles can be applied to this card, given that it turns into a building when dropping below 50% HP. The beauty of the cannon card is its flexibility, since it can move and behave like a troop and then plop down as a building wherever it is when it drops below half health. The other side of that coin though is that you don't really have a lot of control over where the cannon cart turns into a building, since it really depends on what your opponent plays to defeat it. For example, the cannon cart may not be the best option against a lone hog rider, since the hog won't damage it, leaving the cannon cart as a troop and not allowing it to pull the hog. But if your opponent were to send in a musketeer with the hog rider, the cannon cart can actually do a good job, as it does a bit of tanking, some damage, and will pull the hog for a bit as well once the musketeer takes it out. After a recent balance change update, the cannon cart no longer has a shield like the Dark Prince, so it won't be able to fully soak a fireball or lightning without that damage leaking into its building form, which was actually quite the nerf for the card. When using the cannon cart, you want to be careful that it actually turns into a building within range of the opponent's tower if used offensively. For example, if you place it in the pocket after one tower is down, this will do a lot of damage if left ignored, but your opponent can use something like the log to move the cart out of range just before it hits half health, leading to it just sitting there and decaying while getting no value. One way the cannon cart shines on defense is in its ability to one-shot goblins, meaning you can defend a goblin barrel while taking only a couple of hits and then make a strong counter push out of it. The Mortar is the original siege building, with the only other one being the X-Bow. The key to mastering the Mortar is timing and protection. You can use it defensively to kite tanks and take out ground swarms, or offensively at the bridge to pressure. The Mortar is unique compared to the X-Bow because not only does it do splash damage, but it has a dead zone of 3.5 tiles surrounding it, so you can get creative with some placements that will both distract and tank against a small push and get some damage on the opponent's tower at the same time. For example, you can place a Mortar here right up against the river in the middle to pull an incoming giant, and the Mortar will then target the tower once the giant enters the dead zone. This ends up being a pretty clean play for only 4 elixir. When using the Mortar offensively, your goal is to protect it like it's your win condition. Be ready to distract enemy troops with skeletons, a knight, or an ice spirit so that the Mortar stays alive and gets more damage on the tower. Don't be afraid to play the Mortar purely for defense though when needed, as the splash damage can actually be quite nice for taking out ground swarms behind the enemy's tank. As you'll see with the X-Bow, when placing the Mortar at the bridge instead of in the middle, which is where you'll likely want to place it most of the time, make sure to place it 1 tile back from the river to give yourself space to protect and defend it while it shoots at the tower. The X-Bow is one of the most polarizing cards in the game, and I completely understand why people hate it. The X-Bow can be absolutely devastating once it locks onto your opponent's tower, and if they don't have a zap or something else to reset it, they'll likely lose their entire tower. If you've ever faced an X-Bow player, you already know how annoying this thing can be when it's used properly. The single biggest thing that separates good X-Bow players from bad ones is patience. You don't just drop it at the bridge every time you hit 6 elixir. You want to wait until you've successfully defended needed a push and have leftover troops alive. Then you can set up the X-Bow behind them as they're about to cross the bridge. That way, this counter push becomes your support for the X-Bow, and now your opponent is on the back foot and needs to urgently defend your X-Bow. The best placements for the X-Bow are very similar to those of the Mortar, except that you won't typically want to place it in the middle at the river because it doesn't have a dead zone, and placing it there wouldn't be optimal for offense or defense, most likely resulting in your opponent taking the X-Bow out easily and getting an elixir advantage. Defensively, it's also one of the best tank killers in the game. A defensive X-Bow can deny a lot of space and safely chip away at enemy pushes before they even cross the bridge, all from the safety of being firmly in your side of the arena. If you do decide to use the X-Bow, I would definitely recommend using the evolved Snowball in your deck as well, as this spell feels like it was built for X-Bow decks. Not only can it push troops away from the X-Bow and buy you time, but the troops inside of the Snowball are untargetable while it rolls, meaning you can pretty much get free locks on the tower every time it's in cycle unless your opponent catches on and really spreads out their blockers. The X-Bow is also unique in that it has a very natural synergy with another building in the game, that being the Tesla. The Tesla pairs extremely well with the X-Bow since it can be placed in front of it due to its smaller 2x2 size, allowing it to tank for the X-Bow and help remove any distractions at the same time by taking them out. This card is by no means confined to X-Bow decks though, as it can be a very effective and versatile building in almost any deck. The beauty of the Tesla is that in addition to being smaller than other buildings, it also hides underground until enemies get close, meaning it can't be pre-spelled or sniped easily. The only way your opponent can do this is by simply leaking elixir and waiting for the Tesla to naturally decay, but you can avoid this by not playing the Tesla unless they're already pushing your tower. Positioning wise, the classic 3-2 placement, 3 tiles from the river, 2 from the center, covers both lanes and forces troops to walk into range of both towers in most cases. The Tesla is also one of only a few buildings that can attack air units, and it does an amazing job at taking down an incoming balloon, even if it's supported by some minions or bats. Another thing to note with the Tesla is that it can be damaged by the earthquake spell even when underground, so if you're playing against Hog EQ, it's recommended to wait a bit to try and place your Tesla after the earthquake has already come out. Since your opponent will likely try and play their earthquake proactively, switching up your Tesla placement can also be a very effective way at shutting down their pushes and making them waste the earthquake. Just make sure you don't overcommit on defense, and remember, the Tesla is a reactive card, not a proactive one. The Goblin Drill is technically a building according to the in-game card filters, so we'll cover it here instead of in the win condition video, especially since it can be used like a defensive building if needed. The Goblin Drill, like the Miner, can be placed anywhere in the arena, which is a big part of why it can be so versatile. The best placement depends on what you're trying to use the drill for. On defense, the drill can be used in a pinch at a normal 3-2 placement to pull incoming tanks like a giant or hog rider while the goblins chip away at their health. The Goblin Drill will also knock back lighter units like the Berserker when it comes out of the ground on its target, so make sure to utilize this knockback when using the drill on defense. Due to this knockback and the short lifespan of the card compared to its hit points, it's often more effective to simply place the drill right on top of something like a giant rather than trying to pull it to the middle. Then on offense, the drill can be used very similarly to the Goblin Barrel, where you'll likely want to switch up the placement of the drill to make it a bit harder for your opponent to predict and easily counter. Keep in mind though, the goblins will always spawn from the front or top of the drill, so placing it in front of the tower is preferable when possible to increase the likelihood of some solid damage. The Tornado can also be used alongside the drill to pull away defensive troops like the Skeleton Army and Valkyrie right before the drill goes down, as this will allow the 2 death spawned goblins to get some solid damage in. The drill's spawn damage is enough to kill skeletons, and when paired with the Zap or Snowball, it can also take out something like a Goblin Gang no problem. And one more great way to use the Goblin Drill is against incoming charging cards like the Battle Ram, Prince, or Ram Rider, as the spawn knockback will cancel out their charge and then the drill and goblins will fully take them out for a positive or even trade. The Inferno Tower is one of the highest risk, highest reward buildings in the game. It melts tanks like the Giant, Golem, and Lava Hound with ease, but if your opponent has a Zap or similar card for resetting, you need to be more careful with it if you want to get a lot of value. Cards like the Electro Wizard, Lightning, and Zap completely ruin its ramp up damage, so your job is to bait those cards out first if your opponent is using them. Positioning is also crucial. The 4-2 placement works best against heavy tanks, while a 3-2 placement helps against faster pushes like the Hog Rider. With 1748 health at tournament standard, it's also a great defensive tool for catching battle rams or balloons if timed perfectly, since the ramp up damage can delete them just before they connect. The other enemy of the Inferno Tower is swarms like the Skeleton Army and Minion Horde, as those will never allow the Inferno to ramp up to its true damage. So make sure to not only bait out reset cards like the Zap, but also keep an eye on your opponent's swarms and maybe pair it with something like an Executioner or Sparky so that you don't waste your Inferno Tower. Because of the Inferno Tower's high hit points and damage, it can actually be an amazing answer to siege decks like the X-Bow and Mortar, since you can place it directly on the other side of the bridge and it will fully tank and destroy either card, still surviving to deny that lane for a little while after. The other thing to watch out for with the Inferno Tower is the Dark Goblin, Magic Archer, and Princess, as all of those can outrange it and therefore weaken or destroy it for effectively no elixir on your opponent's part, since the troops still survive with full HP for a counter push. The Barbarian Hut is basically a wall that punches back. The hut has a lifetime of 30 seconds, and every 15 seconds it'll spawn a wave of 3 barbarians each, as well as 1 barbarian upon death. While it may look like the Barbarian Hut has 2 death barbarians when left alone, this is only because it tries to spawn a final wave just before it decays and only spawns 1 barbarian before dying. In a pinch, dropping a rage spell on the Barbarian Hut at any point during its lifespan will cause the last wave to fully spawn, effectively granting a 4 barbarian wave at death instead of only 2. The hut can be used on defense to easily fully counter a Royal Giant or Electro Giant for an easy, even, or positive trade. This also works against the Mega Knight for another positive trade. For example, if your opponent just spent a rocket or fireball, immediately place your hut in the opposite lane. They'll have no efficient way to remove it, and they'll be forced to defend the incoming barbarians, as 3 barbarians is no joke if left alone on your tower. Be aware of opponents using the Bowler or Executioner, as those can both take out the barbarians and the hut with ease due to their long-range splash damage and piercing. The Barbarian Hut is also not a catch-all defense, as it's pretty useless against air or even some bigger swarms, so it's important to have a couple of extra elixir in hand after playing it so that you can defend properly. The Elixir Collector or Elixir Pump is one of the scariest buildings to face in the entire game, because when you see your opponent play it, you immediately feel pressure to do something so that they don't build up a crazy 25 elixir push that you'll never be able to defend. It costs 6 elixir with a lifetime of 1 minute and 26 seconds and generates 1 elixir every 12 seconds. In case you didn't already know, the Elixir Collector visually fills up with elixir to show you when the next elixir is coming, which will be when it's completely full. If left alone completely, the Elixir Collector will generate 7 elixir and then an 8th upon death, so it not only gives you a positive return, but it's an easy way to convert an elixir advantage in the moment into a faster generation speed over time, allowing you to build massive pushes that are often just impossible for your opponent to defend. The right time to place it is when you have a full or near full elixir bar and control of the tempo. Dropping it while your opponent has a full push coming will just lose you the game, since they'll take your tower and also destroy the collector before it even generates more than 1 or 2 elixir back. The Elixir Collector should always be placed behind your crown tower, specifically behind the one with more health, to discourage your opponent from trying to use spells on it, since they won't be able to chip the tower they're pushing on. If your opponent is using the rocket, that is the situation in which you'd want to place your collector in front of your king tower to prevent them from hitting either tower when rocketing your collector. If they're using the lightning spell, you won't really be able to prevent this, so it'd be beneficial to bait out their lightning or just wait until they've already used it to play your collector so that it can actually stay alive. Be very careful in matches against the Miner or Void spell, as both can be very effective ways to take out your collector for an easy positive trade for your opponent. The Elixir Collector should almost never be used in the middle like a normal building for pulling purposes, since it's never worth the cost. That being said, this can actually be worth it and justifiable if you just need something quick to distract your opponent's Hog Rider or Giant in the last 10 seconds of the match when you've already taken a tower, since you'll win the game before having to face the consequences of that elixir deficit. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see how to properly use every spell, click this video.